Hello, Yakri here with another Warframe video. So this time I want to talk about Chroma in a little bit more depth. We're going to mainly focus on his changes, recent changes, not including the useless changes to his one, and primarily covering Vex armor, right? And we're also going to talk about what was changed, why, and the damage calculations behind that, right? So first off, let's see how much damage we can get on here, right? So we're going to get 2,300 damage pretty much every time with this gun. This is the Dex Sybaris for reference. I'll show you my build and my Chroma build in a second after this. So let's drop this buff off really quick. What's the base damage? So we got 2,300 damage boosted, 650, 650. Okay, pretty reliable, very nice. Okay, so let's take a look at our Chroma build and our Dex Sybaris build and talk this over. So Dex Sybaris, pretty simple crit-based build. I've got gas damage on here for doing low-level missions, so it's a little bit weak versus these greener guys. But yeah, you know, basic stuff. No Riven mod, nothing super fancy, just a normal build. And on Chroma, the other stuff really doesn't matter because I'm not quite sure what the new optimal build is going to be for him after the changes to his armor buff mostly, right? I've seen some people claiming that going health with him, right? Going fire chroma and having the health buff from elemental ward is more durable, and that's certainly been my experience in practice. I don't know if the numbers actually bear that out for sure, but it does certainly seems that way. So this is the build I'm using, and the primary thing of importance here is the 244% power strength. I've set up Rhino so that he has the same amount of power strength, and I believe either have or can add corrosive projection to him as well. So remember, that was 2,300 damage we were getting with the Dex Sybaris. Let's bring out Rhino. Config B, corrosive, we've both got corrosive projection. All right, 244% power strength. Dex Sybaris, let's see how we do against the exact same enemies. All right, so first off, let's get a couple shots in on these guys so you can see it's still 650 damage. Oh, well, that was unfortunate. 650 damage. All right, now what if we roar? 1,400 damage, 1,400 damage, 1,400 damage. Boom. All right, so now you might have noticed that that's considerably less damage than 2,300 damage, the amount of bonus damage that Chroma gave to these guys. And that's because, post-rework, Chroma has the second highest direct damage buff in the game after Eclipse. Eclipse, of course, probably being effectively weaker than Vex armor because it's not very reliable. Light levels in this game are kind of fucky. Your ult, surprisingly, does not add additional light levels, blah, blah, blah. And of course, Banshee can give a much higher multiplier in like the several hundred range, but of course it is on enemies and does not work in a lot of cases where Vex armor would work, right? Okay, so why show this off in particular? Well, that's because a lot of people have been saying that Chroma does not do as much damage as Rhino, which is a little ridiculous. And now he's just not any good for anything. Now, the thing is that, oh gosh, I really need to change like this to be my A selection. So here's the thing, Chroma, let's look at his abilities, right? Spectral Scream, not super useful. Effigy has some uses, mostly for giving you extra credits, but not too useful. Vex Armor and Elemental Ward, these are the two key things. So Vex Armor is mostly better than Rhino's Roar. Why? Well, it's because although it is more inconvenient to use, it gives a armor buff. Rhino's Roar only gives a damage boost. It gives a damage boost that is in most cases better than Rhino's Roar. And that's pretty much the deal right there, right? The damage amp is better, the armor increase exists. So it has some utility that Rhino Roar does not. Elemental Ward is also available to Chroma, and Chroma's Elemental Ward has several different options, right, on it. So, what is it on shield capacity? Did I choose the wrong setup? I think it should be HP right now. Yeah, health. Okay, so Elemental Ward right now gives you bonus health. It has, 3 other configurations, each of which has its own unique benefits. And does Rhino have anything like that? No, he's got nothing instead of Elemental Ward. He has some external abilities, not team buffing oriented abilities, right? So some people are saying like, well, Chroma doesn't have anything really unique about him. He doesn't really belong in a squad. He does have 2 rather unique abilities about him, though. Both Vex Armor and Elemental Ward are not particularly replicated by any other Warframes, and their particular combination is certainly not well replicated by other Warframes. Having 2 durability buffs for your allies is quite handy, and in fact, the fact that it does boost armor, right? It has 2 different abilities. If you choose its Ice Elemental Ward to boost armor, can still be very valuable when you're teaming up with other Warframes that have abilities that key off of base armor, right? Like Rhino. For example, having Ice Elemental Ward and Vex Armor Aura now as Rhino, absolutely fantastic if you're doing the Ironclad Charge Rhino. Really great. And so yeah, Chroma has a lot of value as a team player. If he's lost value somewhere, it's in his ability to solo content, certainly, because he is much less durable himself than he used to be. But he has definitely gained value as a frame to have in a squad compared to previously, and he is fairly unique for that role, right? Additionally, although he isn't as tanky as he used to be, he's still a lot more tanky than frames that don't actually have any kind of direct tank, like Octavia. Okay, so let's dive into MS Paint for a bit here, and that's going to cover most of the rest of the content for this. The initial demonstration here was just to show off the fact that yes, Chroma does in fact hit quite hard still, and in fact better than Rhino with similar power, strength, and weapons. There is a subscript to that with just the right kind of Riven, Rhino's shout might be better, but other than that, not so much. Okay, so changing into MS Paint. So let's talk about how Chroma's damage buff used to work, right? Okay, so let's say we have B for base damage. Got your weapon's base damage here. Now normally B is multiplied by Serration, right? So let's multiply it by Serration. And then once you multiply it by Serration, you're gonna have your elemental mods, right? And there's additional damage added on here, and we've got E1. That's an elemental mod. And what goes on in here is basically that it takes your base damage, right, B, and it multiplies it. This is actually your modified base damage. It's a little M. That's not really an M, but your modified base damage. So it takes this whole thing here, right? Your base damage after it's been modified by Serration and other effects, and then it multiplies that by E, right? And that's probably going to be like 0.9 for just a single elemental mod. And it adds that onto the total damage, okay? So the total damage is going to be like, there's going to be some other stuff in here, and we're going to have the total damage. This whole thing is the total damage. Okay, so how Chroma's Vex Armor was sort of supposed to work before was that we have the total damage times Chroma buff, Vex Armor, right? So this total times C. Here's the thing, though. What happened is that C kind of somehow, I'm really not sure how they managed to fuck this up, honestly. C kind of snuck in here. And so we have E times C. And let's pretend E is not just one elemental mod, but several elemental mods. And so you've made corrosive here, right? And let's say I'm going to go with corrosive. Corrosive is electric and toxic. So then we've got heat and cold blast, right? So we've got another element over here, right? E2. And then that is also multiplied by C, right? And then all of this goes together and is multiplied by C. See where I'm going here? So these little things, this shit is not supposed to be happening. And the end result is that Chroma's damage buff is ridiculously high. You might see 700%, but what you're really getting is, so 700%, that's 7 times damage. What you're actually getting is closer to like 300 times damage, right? Instead of 7. That's a sizable amount more than intended. And that is why Chroma could easily one-shot Eidolon body parts, right? All on his lonesome, probably even with weapons that weren't too well optimized. You'd at least need, you know, the complex damage types to get the crazy multipliers, but you wouldn't need a Riven mod, you wouldn't need any primed mods in particular. You just need some two elemental mods, preferably 4 elemental mods and Serration, and you're good to go, pretty much, right? So this was a little bit overpowered, and that's why they nerfed him. And now here's the thing, though: they could have admittedly just cut these out, right? You cut these out, and now it's just 7 times damage again. Okay, that's much more reasonable, but it still probably would have one-shot Eidolons, even with gear that's not that great. Why? Because this whole thing right here would be the best damage multiplier in the game versus Eidolons, even if we fixed this bug here, right? So that's a bit of a problem, because Eidolons are like endgame content, and you're supposed to at least have like hyper optimized gear, and I've done a lot of grinding in order for it to be trivially easy, right? Like, to a certain extent in games, it's not necessarily a problem if the endgame content is easy, but you should have to work to make it easy, right? In these like RPG grind type games, if it's easy for some character because they're unbalanced, that's a problem. That's exactly what the case was with Chroma, right? It was too easy because he was too good at doing this, right? And it was something that didn't matter previously because his damage for enemies before Eidolons was such hilarious overkill that it really was kind of irrelevant, right? Because if he can one-shot an enemy, there's probably like 5 other frames that can one-shot the same enemy, or 10 other frames that can one-shot the same enemy, or in fact a gun that can one-shot the same enemy no matter who you put it on, right? So it doesn't really matter. But now we ran into a situation where it matters. So some people have been saying stuff like, oh, why is it taking DE so long to change this if it was really such a big problem? Well, the thing is that there was no like way for Chroma to abuse this absurd damage he had until now, really, right? Because we didn't have any crazy enemies like the Eidolons where it would actually matter. And so they left it alone, because why would you waste time fixing a bug like this, especially in a way that's probably going to annoy the players when you don't really have a reason to fix it. See what I'm saying? So it would have basically been a waste of time for them to fix it prior to about now, right? And so they probably let it lie under the radar, and then they realized, oh, Chroma's just slaughtering all the Eidolons, maybe we should fix this now. Okay, that's kind of how this sort of thing comes to be. Now, the thing is that they also got rid of this, right? They took this out and they put it in here, okay? So now we have this calculation that looks more like this. We got B times your Serration, right? Plus your Chroma buff. Now, the thing is if you're a little astute here, you might realize this is actually pretty good, because Serration is like 165%. Oh, fuck. That's terrible. 65, right? I should turn down my mouse sensitivity. Maybe this will be easier, right? Okay, here we go. And this Chroma buff, well, you can probably get this to like 700%. 700%, that's pretty good. That looks like a 6, but it's supposed to be a 0. Yeah. 700%, right? So 700%, that's almost, it's not 7 times 165 quite, but it's quite a lot more, right? And we all know how important Serration is to your overall weapon damage. And so this number here is going to be factored into these things up here, right? The elemental damage is going to be higher because the base damage that it's being based on is now higher, right? And this is what, this sort of equation here, right? This is what DE means when they're referring to an additive damage buff, okay? Typically, I mean, there's a lot of confused talk about it, right? So, like, this is an additive damage buff, but I mean, it would make sense if there was a damage buff that was like plus 500 damage. That would be additive, right? But anyway, so this is how Chroma's ability is working now, as far as I or anyone else seems to be able to tell, and it's pretty good, right? It does fairly high damage. And the thing is that Rhino's buff is still out here, right? Like this, Rhino's buff. But the thing is that Rhino's buff is like going to be like 100%. Like 120%. What do I have it at? Well, it's like 120% or so, when Chroma's is like 671, right? So this 120%, not so bad. 671% when out here applied to total damage, pretty broken, okay? So that's another reason why it was moved inside and made to be this additive buff. That's because he's gonna give it to all your teammates, right? And to give a buff that's 7 times better than what Rhino gives you, well, not 7 times better, right? This is going to be like 5 point something times better than the buff that Rhino has to your entire team, well, that's a little broken. It's a little broken, and it kind of does the opposite thing of what people are saying has happened. And if they'd done this, Rhino would be fucking irrelevant. Like, why the fuck would you care about Rhino buffing your weapon damage if you can have this thing that's 5.6 times better than what Rhino can do, right? And he also has some other buffs. He buffs your armor too. Wow, fuck Rhino. This is the new king. So yeah, it was kind of like, I think it's kind of a balancing factor. It does put him in line with other Warframes now, and I think that's a good thing, mostly. He does have some unique features to him. We just really need to have his 1 and 4 changed and made a little bit more interesting, because they're kind of bland right now. And although he has 2 features that do set him out from other frames, they're both buffs, right? And this has been kind of a long-standing issue with Chroma, but it's a little bit more of one, I think, now that he can't just YOLO solo insanely high-tier endgame content, right? Okay, so shit, does this cover all the damage stuff? I think this covers the damage calculation stuff. I want to thank who was it? Like this, I was working on some of this stuff myself, and then I found these posts by user KitYouOut on Reddit, and they're pretty well done, and he did all the testing and math on this already, so I was very happy to find that. In particular, he did all the longhand calculations to compare this to Rhino and explain why it is that Rhino buff becomes better if you have a good enough only if you have a good enough Riven and stuff. So I'm going to link to those in the description. It's very cool of him to do that. And I think it's been underappreciated on Reddit comments, but anyway. So yeah, if you want to put more information on how this whole business works, you can go read those. Now, I wanted to reply to, so if you're not really interested in the rest of this, feel free to fuck off now. That I've gotten pretty much the bulk of the useful information in this that's going to be in this video out there. I wanted to reply to some comments Tactical Potato said, some things Tactical Potato said in one of his recent videos on like the new Chroma, right? What is it called? The new Chroma for better or worse. I'll link to his video as well in my description. Now, he said a couple of things that I don't really agree with, and they kind of had an implication, although I don't want to put words into his mouth, that I also don't agree with. And he said, so the first thing he said that I don't agree with is he said, Chroma, no longer stands out among other Warframes that now give similar buffs. He went on to say some other things and said there's just nothing special about him, right? This is not true. Elemental Ward alone would be something special about him, in that you can be rotated between 4 different types of buffs, and a couple of them are fairly unique. I don't think the toxic buff, team-wide reload speed. Does anyone else give team-wide reload speed? I'm not sure. Maybe someone does, but that's pretty handy. Plus health. I'm not sure there's any other plus health in the game. If there is, it's pretty rare. Like maybe one other person does that. And he, of course, can stack this with Vex Armor, right? So each of those 4 options he can stack with Vex Armor. And Vex Armor gives you both the best team damage buff in the game, in my opinion. Eclipse theoretically has higher numbers, but in practical terms it usually doesn't. It's the best team weapon damage buff in the game that also gives a sizable bonus to armor, right? Which is particularly handy for like sort of a synergy with other frames. Like it has a huge amount of synergy with Rhino, for example, because with Ironclad Charge Rhino, having that boost from Vex Armor to your base armor can give you a really, really crazy high iron skin and then you can do the what's it called? Iron Shrapnel and explode it and do crazy things with that. And that's not the only example of synergy. There's a decent number of frames that have their total armor worked into their abilities, right? So I think this just isn't true at all, right? There is something special about him, and it's basically that he has 2 interesting buffs that are particularly powerful, and they affect your team, and you can build team comps around those buffs, right? It's not as much as I would like to see in any Warframe, but it's more actually that's special about him than there was before, at least in terms of if you want to put him in a team or something, which I didn't actually quote him on that, but I'm pretty sure he said something similar to that effect in the video. That is not a reason to put him on a team now over like Rhino, but there in fact is. So really don't agree with that. And he mentioned he talked about, this is not quoting, but paraphrasing. He talked about how DE's reason for nerfing Chroma, was that Chroma was one-shotting Eidolons, and he was making it too easy to solo them. And so he said, this is a quote, "And already we have players killing all 3 Eidolons in one night cycle with a different Warframe." The thing is that doesn't really change DE's statement or in any way make it hypocritical or nonsensical or anything, right? All it means is that perhaps there's another Warframe that needs to get nerfed, right? Furthermore, the real issue is, like, as I went over with you in the math earlier, right? His damage was crazy far out of line, and there is no doubt that was a sizable contributing factor to why he was nerfed / fixed in this way, right? And I think it was completely warranted, frankly. I'd like to see some other changes to Chroma, perhaps something done with his ult that makes him more solo viable again, perhaps a base armor boost, 50 more maybe, and something done with his one that's a little bit better than what they did with it now. I probably prefer a complete replacement, but point is that he was a problem, right, with Eidolon balance, and nerfing him is a step that they had to take, right? Even if it's not enough to resolve problems with people killing Eidolons more easily than they ought to be able to, according to DE, it is certainly a step that had to be taken in addition to other steps, because his damage was so far out of line, okay? And I think, like, he makes this implication, he said, was Chroma the issue to begin with, or was it something else? Was it the Eidolons themselves, or the actual battle mechanics of killing those Eidolons? And the thing is, it's possible that there are problems with the battle mechanics of killing the Eidolons. Maybe the Eidolons need to be tougher, right? Maybe there needs to be some sort of, like, extra skill requirement in how the mechanics work, make them harder to make them harder to deal with or something. But whether or not that is the case, Chroma was still definitely a problem because of how ridiculously out of line his damage numbers were. I don't think this really changes that, right? And even if there are other problems, he was also a problem, right? And I think they were being totally correct about that. I'm not sure I actually buy that him having multiplicative damage was a bug. Like, I mean, I buy the whole triple dipping as a bug, but it actually being multiplicative, being a bug, really, I don't really actually see that happening. Like, or at least if it really was an accident, it's impressive. Like, I want to, like, throw down my programmer credentials because I'm not exactly that experienced, but let's say math, like addition and multiplication in programming, not super different from doing it on pen and paper. Not actually very hard. Adding or multiplying together damage formula is pretty easy. So, boy, it's quite a screw up anyway. So I'm not sure I 100% buy that part was always a bug, but it still made sense to change it, so I'm not sure it fucking matters. Anyway, like, the insinuation is basically that, like, oh, Chroma wasn't a problem, and I think that's crazy. It's crazy to say that Chroma having, like, 300 times weapon damage wasn't potentially a problem, especially when so many people, for good reason, have complained about damage gating and invulnerability phases in fights, right? And Eidolons do technically still have invulnerability phases, but it's implemented in a sane way for once, and I think it's actually great that DE is going out of their way to fix up the fights a bit, potentially by nerfing Warframes, because probably a fair number of them are out of line and high in the way of being too powerful and making content too trivial, to make these fights work better without just slapping on damage gating or invulnerability phases. Like, would the solution really have been to, like, cap the damage per shot of Eidolon limbs to, like, 500? Right? And maybe cap the damage per second to 500? So you have to just, like, put in fire for X number of seconds no matter what the fuck you do? I don't think so. nor would it have been productive whatsoever to give them enough HP or damage to make them challenging for an unchanged Chroma, considering how ridiculously high his damage was. So I'm not sure really what the alternative here is supposed to be. Really, I think this is the best route. If there is a particular Warframe sticking up as being far too powerful and too good at beating endgame combat content, they should be nerfed. And if, you know, once they're nerfed, someone else does it with a different Warframe, nerf that one too. Just keep going down the list. If there's a weapon showing up over and over again in these attempts, perhaps it needs a look at as well. If you, at some point, if you keep pounding down the nails, there eventually won't be any left. Of course, the trick is not to pound them down too far so that everything levels off at a nice tier where the content is somewhat challenging, but not impossible, and all the Warframes don't feel like shit to play, but I mean, that's a whole different game developer challenge. I will say that I think in the case of Chroma, although his 1 and 3 definitely need a look at, and I really hope that when they are looked at, something is done to make him better as a solo frame again, although he's still pretty okay, but I'd like to see him be fantastic like he was before. Although they need to be looked at, his Vex armor is actually in a great place, despite what many people have said, because it is in line with other frames. I don't think it needs to be out of line with other frames, especially not if we want to see his 4 and 1 ever fixed, right? Because the only way he actually needs Vex armor to be excessively good is if it's his only thing he has going for him. If his 4 is reworked to actually be quite useful, and perhaps his 1 is replaced with a whole different ability that has some utility, then he's going to be even better than he is now, right? And right now, he is a premier team buff frame in terms of damage. So, if Vex armor was looked at again and buffed, changing his ultimate and his 4, I shouldn't really call it an ultimate because they vary so widely, his 4 and his 1 to be better would make him really overpowered, basically. So I just hope we see the full rework for Chroma come fairly soon, and that his 1 and 4 are looked at. And if they are replaced with abilities that are good and in theme with what Chroma has been good at so far, which is to say tanking and being a great solo frame, I don't think we're going to have any other problems with him. Vex armor is already in a good place, provided he has a useful 4 and 1. Alright, so that's all I wanted to get at. I still like Chroma a lot, and now that I've tried Fire Chroma, had a lot better time with him in Eidolon fights. I tried Ice and Toxic both, and it was not super great. Don't recommend it. But, yeah, let me know what you think. Yakri out.